Chapter 8. Russian Aliyah. On January 5, 1989, in the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, the following article appeared entitled, "Soviet Jews to Have Presence in the World Jewish Congress." The formalizing of a World Jewish Congress presence in the Soviet Union cleared its last hurdle this week when Moscow Chief Rabbi Adolf Sheyevich confirmed in writing that he is no longer a member of the Anti-Zionist Committee of the Soviet Public, which he said was dismantled. Rabbi Sheyevich wrote to World Jewish Congress President Edgar Bronfman on January 1st, requesting that he be included in WJC meetings. In the letter, he stated unequivocally that he is not a member of the Anti-Zionist Committee and never participated in any acts against Jews or Israel. But for the moment, the World Jewish Congress will only allow Rabbi Sheyevich observer status at any meetings he attends of the World Jewish Body, according to Elon Steinberg, WJC Executive Director. Nor will Rabbi Sheyevich be the only representative of Soviet Jewry at WJC meetings. Steinberg stressed Wednesday that representatives of all walks of Jewish life in the Soviet Union would be represented, from religious to cultural. He explained, for example, that Soviet Jews would be invited to an upcoming meeting of the European branch of the Congress to take place in Strasbourg, and a meeting of the World Jewish Congress Executive in Montreal. But if the Soviets were to allow Rabbi Sheyevich and not other Soviet Jews to attend WJC meetings, Steinberg said, they would have a political problem, because their good faith would be put to the test. Steinberg said that the path to World Jewish Congress representation in the Soviet Union was opened in Moscow in November when Bronfman met with Soviet Foreign Minister Eduard Shevardnadze. Bronfman informed Shevardnadze at the time that Rabbi Sheyevich, as a representative of an important segment of Jewish life, can participate in the World Jewish Congress, as long as he is not a member of the Anti-Zionist Committee. There were two principal obstacles that the Soviets had to clear before the World Jewish Congress could include Soviet Jewish representation. Steinberg said, quote, "The unwillingness of Soviet authorities to allow Soviet Jewish participation in the Congress and the non-existence of a representative, organized structure of the Soviet Jewish community," end quote. The Soviet Union is the last communist bloc country to join the Congress. During the meetings in November, the Soviets agreed in principle to Soviet Jewish participation in the activities and meetings of the world body to restore the links of Soviet Jewry to the world global Jewry. We're in the process of creating now a federation of Jewish communities in the Soviet Union so that there will be an authentic representative body of the widest possible spectrum of the Soviet Jewish community, which we hope will then become a full participant and representative in the World Jewish Congress, he said. During the November talks, the Soviet foreign minister suggested that Rabbi Sheyevich and other chief rabbis of Soviet cities represent a federation of synagogues in the Congress. WJC had no objection to the presence of synagogue representation, but the International Jewish Organization is also insisting on inclusion of Jews from all walks of life, from refuseniks to secular Jews, from cultural activists to members of the B'nai Teshuvah movement of newly observant Jews. Steinberg said inclusion of non-government accepted Jewish representatives in the WJC is to build a Jewish cultural center in Moscow and stipulated in a contract that was signed in October by I.Z. Lebler of Australia, who is a vice president of the Congress. Soviet authorities and Jewish refuseniks and cultural activists who would not only participate but run the cultural center, Steinberg said. End article. The following article appeared in the September 22, 1989 Jewish Telegraphic Agency entitled "Senate Approves Measure Helping Soviet Jews to Enter the U.S. as Refugees." For the second time in 2 months, the Senate has approved a measure that would make it easier for Soviet Jews to enter the country as refugees. Such a provision, if eventually signed into law, has become less important substantively to U.S. Jewish groups, following the Bush administration's announcement last week that it would process Soviet applicants for refugee status in Moscow instead of Rome. In the last 12 months, Jewish groups have spent some $20 million in Rome to house and assist more than 5,000 Soviet Jews who have been refused refugee status, says Michael Schneider, Executive Vice President of the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee. Under the Moscow processing system, Soviet Jews would live at home while their applications are adjudicated. In addition, President Bush's announcement of the refugee ceiling of 50,000 Soviets for the 1990 fiscal year will start October 1st. It is not expected to be large enough to satisfy all Soviet Jews who would like to immigrate here as refugees. Official refugee status allows entry to the United States, access to U.S. government funds for transportation and resettlement, and the opportunity to become a U.S. citizen. The Senate measure, sponsored by Senator Frank Lautenberg of New Jersey, would give less discretion to Immigration and Naturalization Service adjudications of refugee status, who since last September have refused granting it to those Soviet Jews not demonstrating a well-founded fear of persecution. Both the House and the Senate this summer approved similar measures, but they were attached to completely different bills, one a foreign aid bill, and one a bill authorizing funds for the State Department. Under legislative procedure, such differences must be resolved in a conference committee on the same bill. On July 13th, the House adopted a refugee provision sponsored by Representative Bruce Morrison of Connecticut to the 1990 Foreign Aid Appropriations Bill. On July 20th, the Senate adopted Lautenberg's amendment to the 1990 State Department Authorization Bill. With the Senate's adoption Wednesday of the refugee provision to its version of the Foreign Aid Bill, Jewish groups will now focus attention on the upcoming conference committee on that bill. The groups prefer the Morrison language, which would give less discretion to INS adjudicators than would the Lautenberg language. The Jewish groups also would like to see the House adopt Senate language requiring the General Accounting Office, the GAO, an arm of Congress that probes the executive branch, to report by the end of the year on the new processing plant in Moscow for Soviet refugees. In another development Wednesday, various senators said they will seek additional funds so that none of the 50,000 refugees would have to come here with private funding. Under Bush's 1990 refugee admissions plan, 10,000 of the 50,000 slots would not be funded by the government. End article. The following article appeared in the October 3rd, 1989 Jewish Telegraphic Agency entitled Jewish Emigration from the USSR Sets a New Record. The gates of the Soviet Union opened wider last month than at any time in memory, unleashing the largest wave of Soviet Jews to emigrate in a single month. A total of 8,442 Jews left the Soviet Union in September, according to the National Conference on Soviet Jewry. That is the highest monthly figure recorded since the conference's Soviet Jewry Research Bureau began tabulating statistics in 1968. While the vast majority of the emigrants came to the United States, 1,042, or 12.3%, arrived in Israel, a slight increase over the previous month. So far this year, 5,031 Soviet Jews have made Aliyah. Based on the numbers who have left so far this year, it is expected that 1989 will top 1979 as the benchmark year for Soviet Jewish emigration. In 1979, 51,320 Jews left the USSR. The cumulative total to date for 1989 is 41,886. The September emigration figure is nearly double the July total and exceeds by nearly 2,000 the number for August, which until now had been the largest monthly figure ever. One factor that helped to swell the September total was the arrival on September 28th of 1,356 Soviet Jews at Kennedy International Airport in New York. It was the largest group of Jewish refugees to arrive in the United States in a single day since the end of World War II. The unprecedented airlift was designed to enable a large number of Soviet Jews to celebrate the Jewish New Year in complete freedom and to reduce the crowds of émigrés waiting near Rome for permission to enter the United States. The massive arrival was geared to coincide with an October 1st change in U.S. regulations governing the admission of Soviet citizens as refugees here in the United States. Those who wish to go to the United States and not Israel are no longer able to leave the Soviet Union on Israeli visas and then drop out and apply for American refugee status in Rome. As of Sunday, those Soviet citizens seeking to live in the United States have had to apply directly at the American embassy in Moscow. According to reports from the Soviet capital, the line Monday morning snaked around the embassy. Soviet Jewry activists in this country are clearly excited about the massive emigration, what they dreamed of and agitated for in over 20 years of advocacy. But while recognizing progress, they speak of remaining problems. Shoshana Cardin, chairwoman of the National Conference, welcomed the substantial increase, but said in a statement, quote, "We remain very much aware that serious problems still exist in Soviet emigration procedures." She cited the continued refusal of permission to certain long-term refuseniks, end quote. The president of the Union of Councils for Soviet Jews, Pamela Cohen, was delighted by the large number of emigres, but clearly worried about the new U.S. policy. She said in a telephone interview, quote, "I almost feel this is the last train. The United States is really undermining its own human rights policies. I'm scared to death that at a time when we should be evacuating people, we're stuck with all kinds of bureaucratic delays," end quote. End article.